The fourth step or question is whether the evidence, although logically relevant, should be excluded because of its potential for unfairness or danger of unfairness. This is an extension of the second principle of evidence derived from Rule 402, which is that all relevant evidence is admissible except or unless inadmissible for other reasons. This is not a relevancy consideration, but rather a counterweight to relevancy based upon such factors as unfair prejudice, confusion of the issues, distraction of the jury, all fairly weighty matters, but also for something as mundane as a waste of time. So Rule 403 sets forth those factors to be considered by a trial judge in balancing the probative value of logically relevant evidence against such counterweights to relevance. Rule 403 is universally applicable. It applies to every item of evidence. There are a couple of rules of evidence that have their own balancing tests, but for the most part, Rule 403 applies to every rule of evidence. There are, in the 400 series of the federal rules, other specific rules of evidence that have already pre-balanced the obviously or assumedly relevant evidence in particular circumstances, such as Rule 404's character evidence rules, Rule 405's routine practice and habit, and then going on through such matters as offers of compromise, withdrawn guilty pleas, liability insurance, rape shield laws, and the admissibility of prior sexual misconduct evidence in cases involving sexual misconduct. All of these particular applications of the principles of Rule 403 set forth a general rule in recurring situations which says when and if such evidence is admissible and when there are exceptions to inadmissibility. But Rule 403, the rule of general application, is one that applies, as I've said, to all situations, and it requires the trial judge to engage in a cost-benefit analysis, weighing on one side of the scale the contributing probative value of the evidence, and on the other side of the scale, the countervailing danger of whatever factor is involved, ranging from unfair prejudice to waste of time. We can note some specifics about this rule at the outset. One is that we could not be considering Rule 403 if we hadn't already decided that the evidence under consideration is relevant. We should not jump right into a 403 analysis when we look at an item of evidence. It is necessary first to determine the relevancy of the evidence using the first three steps or questions. What is the evidence? What is it offered to prove? Does it do so, and how? Another thing to be noted about Rule 403 at the outset is that although it is in the series of the rules the first otherwise or except or unless factor to be considered for excluding otherwise relevant evidence, it is perhaps unwise in the analytical process to consider it next in order after deciding relevance. Perhaps it is better to postpone the consideration of 403 factors until the very end of analysis. This is especially true with respect to hearsay evidence because the determination of relevance is so closely tied to whether the evidence is a statement or not for hearsay purposes. Rule 403 also says that the relevant evidence may be excluded if its potential for unfair prejudice substantially outweighs the probative value. Hence, the trial judge is required to engage in this cost-benefit analysis, weighing the contributing probative value of the evidence on the one hand against the danger potential on the other, and only excluded if the relevance is substantially outweighed by the potential danger. The Supreme Court of the United States gave us considerable direction in how to apply the principles of Rule 403 when it decided the case of Old Chief. In that case, the defendant, Old Chief, was charged with 2 crimes. 1, an assault with a dangerous weapon, and 2, with being a felon in possession of a firearm. The government was going to introduce evidence to support the second charge, being a felon in possession of a firearm, with evidence that Old Chief had suffered a prior conviction for an assault in which he inflicted serious bodily injury. The defendant objected to the admission of the prior conviction, claiming that the trier of fact would be unduly prejudiced if they heard that he had this prior conviction for an assault in which he inflicted serious bodily injury, that the jury would misuse the evidence of his prior felony conviction involving serious bodily injury and misuse it and consider it for the charge against him now of the assault with a dangerous weapon. In other words, the jury would not limit the prior conviction's use to the element of being a felon in possession of a firearm. The government resisted the defendant's claim, and the trial judge agreed with the government. The Supreme Court reversed, holding that the trial judge failed to take into account the discounting of the contributing probative value of the prior conviction when weighing under Rule 403 the potential for unfair prejudice. The court said that it was necessary for the trial judge to discount the value of that other evidence, and thus the court remanded the case and decided in favor of the defendant.